She was the kind of girl who could sit in a room full of people and feel invisible, even if everyone was looking straight at her. At school, she blended into the background, quiet and unassuming, always on the edges of the crowd. She didn't raise her hand unless she had to, didn't speak up unless forced, and often felt like her words would just tumble out awkwardly if she tried. Her teachers noticed her silence sometimes, and most of the time, they assumed she was shy or lazy. What they didn't know was that she carried a world inside her, one that no one at school had ever really seen. From a young age, music had been her refuge. While other kids played games in the yard or laughed loudly in the cafeteria, she would retreat to her room, where an old upright piano stood like a loyal friend. The piano wasn't perfect. The keys were slightly chipped, and the pedals squeaked, but to her, it was perfect. It was where she could pour out her feelings without anyone judging her. She didn't need applause there. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was good. She just needed to play. At home, her parents had noticed her talent early on. They weren't professional musicians, not even close, but they recognized something special in the way she handled the piano. Her fingers moved with a delicate precision that seemed natural, as if the music flowed through her rather than from her. Still, they didn't push her to perform publicly. They wanted her to enjoy it, not to be pressured into being seen. And she liked it that way. The piano was hers and hers alone. School was different. The music teacher, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, had a reputation for being strict. She liked students who were confident, who raised their hands quickly, who played loudly and with flair. Quiet kids like her were often overlooked or, worse, treated like they weren't capable. The girl had tried once or twice to join the class performances, but the experience had been uncomfortable. The teacher had scolded her for being timid, and classmates had whispered behind her back. After that, she decided to stay invisible. On a Monday morning, the classroom was buzzing with the usual chatter. Some students were talking about the weekend. Some were arguing about which songs to play for the next recital, and a few were already practicing their scales quietly at the piano. She sat in the last row, sketchbook open but untouched, pretending to draw. Her mind wasn't on the sketches, though. It was on the quiet hum of the music in her head, the little melody she played in her imagination while the real world went on around her. The teacher paced along the rows of students, sharp heels clicking on the floor. She stopped suddenly in front of the girl. The classroom fell silent as everyone sensed something was about to happen. The teacher's eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Why aren't you practicing?" she asked, voice loud enough for the whole class to hear. The girl shrank slightly in her seat, unsure if she should answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Any words she might say felt too small, too inadequate, like a whisper in a hurricane. The teacher sighed, loud and dramatic, like she was exhausted from the girl's mere presence. "Come on," she said sharply. "Sit at the piano and play something. Let's see if you can actually do what you're supposed to." A ripple of giggles ran through the room. Some students nudged each other, whispering and smirking. She felt her stomach twist. This wasn't about music. It wasn't about sharing what she loved. It was a test, a trap. The teacher wanted to see her fail, and everyone in the room knew it. Her hands shook as she stood up. Every step toward the piano felt like walking across a tightrope with no safety net. She wanted to turn and run, hide in the sketchbook or disappear completely. But somehow, she made it to the piano bench. She sat down, her back stiff, her fingers hovering nervously above the keys. The classroom was dead silent. Even the students who usually whispered to each other stopped. The air felt thick, heavy, as if it were holding its breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the noise, trying to remember the quiet afternoons at home when the piano was just hers, and the music was just hers. Her first note trembled slightly, unsure, but it was there. And then the second note, more confident, more deliberate. The teacher raised an eyebrow, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly, like she was waiting for disaster. Some students started to snicker again, thinking this would be embarrassing, thinking the girl would fumble and everyone would have a good laugh. But then something changed. She didn't play just to meet the teacher's command. She didn't play to prove anything to the class. She played because the music had always been a part of her, a voice she couldn't keep silent any longer. Her fingers moved across the keys like they knew the way even when her mind was full of doubt. The notes flowed naturally, softly at first, then building into something richer and deeper. Her music didn't scream for attention. It didn't ask for applause. But it was honest. It was real. And slowly, the classroom began to listen. The whispers faded. The giggles disappeared. Even the teacher seemed caught off guard, her sharp eyes softening ever so slightly as the girl played. The piece she chose wasn't complicated, at least not in the way some students thought they could impress with flashy speed or exaggerated flourishes. It was simple, tender, full of emotion, like she was speaking without words. Each chord carried a story, each note a confession. The students felt it. They leaned forward, curious and silent. Even those who had mocked her before felt a strange, unexpected respect. Time seemed to stretch. What had felt like an eternity of fear and embarrassment now became a space where only the music existed. She forgot about the teacher, forgot about the class, forgot about the pressure and the fear. All that mattered was the sound beneath her fingers, the way it filled the room, and the way it made her feel alive. When the last note finally lingered and faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Everyone seemed frozen, unsure what to do, as if the music had left them in a kind of awe. Then, slowly, a few claps started. One student began to smile. Another nodded, as if acknowledging something important. And then, almost like a wave, the entire class erupted into applause. The girl sat there, hands still resting on the piano, heart pounding, barely able to breathe. She had never played for anyone like that before. Never had her music been seen, really seen, by anyone outside her own room. And now, suddenly, it was. She had been terrified, humiliated, and yet, somehow, she had created something beautiful in that moment. Something that changed how everyone saw her. The teacher's face was unreadable at first. There was no scolding, no sarcastic comment, nothing. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a small nod that said more than words ever could. It was a rare moment where the authority figure had no words, because nothing could diminish what had just happened. The girl realized then that the power of music was greater than fear, greater than judgment, greater than any attempt to belittle her. After class, students approached her cautiously, unsure how to act after seeing a side of her they had never seen before. Some wanted to compliment her, some wanted to ask her to teach them a few things, and even though she felt nervous, she realized something important. Her voice, the one that had been silent in the classroom for so long, could be heard, and it mattered. For the rest of the day, she walked through the halls differently, not louder, not more confident in the way some students were, but more aware of herself, more aware that she had something to offer the world, even if it was just through the soft, gentle power of her music. She knew there would still be challenges, still moments when people doubted her or tried to embarrass her, but she had faced one of those moments and come through, and that mattered more than anything else. The quiet girl, who had once blended into the background, had changed something in herself and in the way others saw her. She had learned that fear could be transformed into beauty, and that sometimes the moments that feel the most terrifying can also become the moments that define us. And even though she didn't say a word, her music had spoken volumes. After that day in music class, everything felt a little different for her, though not immediately obvious to anyone else. She still walked through the hallways quietly, still took her usual seat at the back of the classroom, still spoke only when she had to. But inside, something had shifted. There was a spark, small but persistent, that refused to be ignored. For the first time, she felt like she had a presence in the world beyond her own private thoughts and music. The next morning, she arrived at school feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. She wasn't sure how her classmates would treat her now. Some might be genuinely impressed, while others might feel jealous or resentful. She kept her head down as she entered the classroom, unsure if she could handle the attention. But the curious whispers began almost immediately. They said she played really well yesterday. I didn't know she could play like that. She's different now. She ignored them and went straight to her seat, pulling her notebook from her bag, pretending to study, pretending that the attention meant nothing. But she couldn't help noticing the way a few students looked at her with newfound respect, or perhaps surprise rather than amusement. She wasn't used to being noticed in a positive way. Usually, attention came with laughter, teasing, or some form of judgment. Now it felt different, though she didn't trust it entirely. The music teacher entered the room, her sharp heels echoing on the floor as usual. She paused at the door, scanning the students, and then her gaze landed on the girl. For a moment, the teacher's expression softened, but only slightly, almost imperceptibly. There was no smile, no words of praise, but the teacher didn't mock or scold her either. That small silence felt like a victory in itself. Class went on, and for the first time in a long while, the girl felt a sense of anticipation rather than dread. When the teacher started talking about the next class performance, she realized all eyes were subtly on her. She hadn't volunteered, but there was a quiet expectation, almost a challenge, lingering in the air. She felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about proving to herself that what had happened yesterday wasn't a one-time accident. During lunch, she sat alone at first, picking at her sandwich, watching the other students laugh and talk. A few came over hesitantly, unsure of how to approach her now. "Hey," one said quietly, "that thing you played yesterday, it was amazing." The words made her heart skip a beat. She nodded, unable to find her voice at first. Compliments were still awkward for her, but she managed a small, shy smile. "Thanks," she whispered. "That was, like, really, wow," the student added, struggling to find words. "I mean, I didn't expect it." She nodded again, letting them speak. She didn't want to seem boastful, but a part of her felt proud. For once, her talent was recognized, not hidden, not ignored, not ridiculed. It was strange to feel that sense of value outside of her room and her piano. The afternoon music class arrived, and the girl entered with a quiet determination. The teacher had announced that students would perform in pairs this time, something that made her nervous. She wasn't used to performing in front of anyone at all, let alone with someone else. She worried that a mistake could ruin everything, that she might falter and everyone would laugh at her again. But the memory of yesterday, the way the notes had flowed from her fingers, gave her courage. She reminded herself that the piano didn't judge, the piano didn't laugh. When the pairs were announced, she found herself partnered with one of the more confident students in the class, a boy who often played loud, fast pieces and expected applause. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "You're really good, huh?" he asked, almost like a challenge. I play," she said softly, not wanting to brag. "Well, let's see what we can do together," he said, shrugging. "I hope you can keep up." Her stomach sank at his words, the underlying challenge in his tone making her anxious. But instead of retreating, she decided to focus on the music, not the pressure. They began practicing a duet, a piece that required precision and coordination. Her partner played confidently, sometimes too fast, sometimes too forceful, but she adjusted, letting her fingers guide her, listening carefully to the rhythm, filling in the spaces where the music needed softness or nuance. Hours passed in practice, and slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The boy started to notice the depth of her skill, the subtle control in her playing, and even the emotion she poured into each note. He stopped rushing, began matching her tempo, and they started to harmonize in a way that felt effortless. The music was alive, not just technically correct, but full of feeling. When it was time for the performance, the classroom was silent. Students watched intently, curious to see how the shy girl would handle the pressure of performing in front of everyone with a partner. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same fear from yesterday, but it was tempered by a quiet confidence. She knew she could do this. She had done it once, and now she could do it again. Stronger. As they began to play, the music filled the room. At first, the notes were cautious, careful, testing the waters, but soon, they grew bolder, richer, flowing naturally between the two of them. The girl played with a clarity and emotion that the boy hadn't expected. Together, they created something beautiful, a performance that felt alive, breathing, and honest. The students who had whispered and snickered yesterday now watched in admiration, captivated by the harmony and the skill of the duo. By the time the final note faded, the room was silent for a beat, and then erupted into applause. This time, the applause was louder, warmer, and more heartfelt. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhilaration. She realized that this moment wasn't about proving anything to the teacher or the class. It was about proving to herself that her talent, her dedication, and her voice mattered. The teacher, standing at the front, nodded approvingly, the harsh lines of her face softening slightly. She didn't say much, but her silence spoke volumes. The girl knew that even someone as strict and critical as the teacher had recognized her ability. That acknowledgement, quiet as it was, felt like a confirmation of her worth. After class, a few students approached her, asking how she had learned to play with such emotion, how she could remain so calm under pressure. She answered softly, humbly, not wanting to seem boastful, but inside she felt a sense of pride she had never experienced before. Her music had become a bridge, connecting her to people who had once ignored or underestimated her. That evening, she returned home and sat at her piano as she always did. But this time, something was different. She didn't play just for herself. She played with the memory of the applause, the admiration, the quiet respect that had started to grow around her. She let her fingers explore new melodies, experimenting, improvising, letting the music take on a life of its own. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was hers. Over the next few days, small changes began to appear in her life. Teachers who had never paid attention to her started noticing her presence. Classmates who had ignored her before now asked for her advice on music, for tips on playing, or even just to hear her play again. She still felt shy and awkward in social situations, but the music gave her a confidence that words could not. It was a quiet strength, one that grew with every note she played. One afternoon, the teacher called her aside after class. She expected criticism, a comment on how she could improve, or even a request to play for the class again. Instead, the teacher said something she didn't expect. "You have a talent," the teacher said, her voice low, almost reluctant. "Don't hide it. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Keep playing. Keep pushing yourself." The words, simple as they were, struck her deeply. She had never heard anyone in authority speak to her like that before. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a critique. It was recognition. And it mattered more than any performance, more than any applause, more than anything she had experienced in her quiet, hidden world of music. From that day on, the piano became more than just a refuge. It became a way for her to step into the world, to connect with people, to share a part of herself she had once kept hidden. Every practice, every performance, even the small ones in class, became a step toward a future she hadn't dared to imagine. She began to understand that fear was not something to be avoided, but something to face. Each time she played in front of others, a small part of that fear transformed into courage. Each time she allowed herself to be seen, she realized that the world could respond with respect and admiration, not just ridicule. And each time she sat at the piano, she was reminded that her music was powerful not because it was loud or flashy, but because it was real, because it was her, the girl who had once been invisible, who had sat quietly in the back of the classroom, was beginning to emerge. She still had a long journey ahead. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and more opportunities for embarrassment. But she had discovered something that no one could take away: the strength that came from facing fear, the courage that came from sharing her gift, and the quiet, undeniable power of her own voice. And so, the music continued, softly, steadily, growing in confidence and beauty with each passing day. The world around her was no longer something to hide from. It was something she could touch, something she could change, something she see. The days after her second performance passed in a blur of new experiences and quiet reflection. She still walked through the school hallways as she always had, small and careful in her movements. But now there was a subtle shift in how she carried herself. She no longer felt invisible, not entirely. The way her classmates looked at her, the way the teacher regarded her with a faint hint of respect, it all added a strange weight she was learning to carry. Music became her shield and her voice all at once. Each morning before school, she would sit at the piano for a while, running her fingers over the keys, letting the sound fill the quiet spaces of her home. The melodies she played were no longer just simple practice pieces. They were expressions of everything she could not say out loud. Her music told stories of fear, of hope, of longing, of moments of doubt turned into courage. And with each passing day, she realized that the music was changing her, just as much as it was reaching others. In class, things were different too. Students who had once ignored her now approached her more often. They wanted to hear her play, to see how she could turn the keys into emotion. And some even asked for tips, wanting to understand the subtle ways she made the piano sing. She was still shy, still careful with her words, but she learned to nod, smile, and quietly show them what she knew. She discovered that she could lead without speaking much, that her music itself was a way of communicating, and that sometimes actions spoke louder than words. One afternoon, the teacher made an unexpected announcement. There would be a school-wide music competition in a few weeks, and every student was encouraged to participate. The girl froze as the words echoed in her mind. Compete in front of the entire school? She had never imagined herself performing on such a stage. Her heart raced at the thought. Her stomach twisted with fear, and for a moment, she considered saying no. But then, she remembered the first time she had played in class. The moment when her music had silenced the room and transformed fear into admiration. She remembered the feeling of connection, of being seen in a way she had never been before. And she realized that if she wanted to grow, She had to face this challenge, no matter how terrifying it felt. She nodded slowly, deciding to try, even if she felt unsure. The next few days were a whirlwind of practice and preparation. She spent hours at the piano, experimenting with different pieces, trying to find the one that could express her best. She wanted something that would not only show her technical skill, but also reveal the depth of emotion she had kept hidden for so long. She tried fast, dramatic pieces, but they felt empty. She tried gentle, soft ones, but they lacked the strength she wanted to show. Finally, she settled on a piece that spoke to her, a melody that was both tender and powerful, full of moments that rose and fell like waves, carrying emotion in every note. As she practiced, she also began to pay attention to the details she had once ignored. She worked on posture, on the way her fingers touched the keys, on the pauses that made the music breathe. Every small adjustment felt like a step towards something bigger, something that went beyond just playing notes correctly. She started imagining the room, the audience, the way the music would reach out to them, and it made her nervous and excited at the same time. Her classmates noticed the change too. Some of them watched quietly as she practiced, whispering to each other in awe. "She's really dedicated," one said. "I didn't realize she worked this hard." Others asked her questions, not to challenge her, but to understand her better, to learn from her. And slowly, she began to feel a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. For the first time, she realized that people could respect her effort, her talent, and even her quiet nature, without trying to change her. The day of the school-wide competition arrived faster than she expected. The gymnasium was filled with students, teachers, and even some parents. The stage was set with bright lights and a grand piano, the kind she had only seen in pictures before. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached it, and for a moment, fear threatened to take over. But she took a deep breath, remembering the classroom performances, the quiet strength that had carried her through them. She reminded herself that the music was hers, and that no matter what happened, she could let it speak. As she sat down and positioned her fingers on the keys, the room seemed to hold its breath. The lights were bright, the seats full of people staring, but she focused on the piano, on the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, on the melody that had been growing inside her for weeks. She began to play, softly at first, testing the waters, and then with more confidence, letting the music flow naturally. The audience was captivated. The notes weren't just sounds. They were emotions made tangible, telling a story without words. People leaned forward, silent, listening to the girl who had once been invisible, who had once feared being seen, now filling the entire room with her music. Every rise and fall of the melody carried feeling, hope, courage, fear, and triumph, all intertwined in a way that drew everyone in. Her hands moved with precision, but more importantly, with feeling. She had learned that music wasn't just about playing the right notes. It was about expression, about honesty, about letting a part of yourself be seen even when it was scary. And in that moment, she let everything be seen. The fear, the determination, the years of secret practice, the quiet confidence she had been building, they all poured out in sound. As the final note lingered and faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the applause began. It was loud, genuine, and uncontainable. People stood, cheering, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the performance. The girl's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of connection, of knowing that her music had touched others in a way that words could not. The teacher, who had often been critical and demanding, approached her afterward. There was no scolding, no critique, no sharp remark. Instead, there was something new, a rare smile, a nod of acknowledgement. "You've grown," the teacher said quietly. "Keep going. Don't stop now." The words felt heavier than any applause. They weren't just recognition of her skill. They were recognition of her courage, her dedication, her persistence. She realized then that the journey she had started months ago, in fear and silence, had brought her to a place where she could not only be seen, but be valued for who she truly was. After the competition, things at school shifted subtly but unmistakably. Students who had once ignored her or underestimated her now sought her out, not just for music, but for advice, for friendship, for guidance. She was still shy, still quiet, but the respect she had earned allowed her to walk a little taller, to smile a little more freely, to share her thoughts without fear of being dismissed. She also noticed changes within herself. She was learning to trust her own voice, not just in music but in life. She began to speak up in class more often, not loudly or aggressively, but with confidence in her ideas and observations. She started participating in discussions, asking questions, and offering insights that surprised even her. The girl who had once feared attention now realized that her presence mattered, that her voice, however quiet, could make a difference. At home, the piano became her sanctuary and her launchpad. She experimented with new compositions, improvising melodies that reflected her experiences, her emotions, and her growing confidence. Each day of practice strengthened not just her skill, but her sense of self. She understood that music was not just an escape. It was a way to face the world, to connect with others, and to express the parts of herself that words could never capture. She began to think about the future differently too. The idea of performing in front of larger audiences, of sharing her talent beyond her school, no longer felt impossible. She imagined herself on stages, in halls filled with people listening, feeling the music as deeply as she did. And while fear still existed, it was no longer paralyzing. It had become a companion, a reminder that she was capable. That courage was built not in the absence of fear, but in the decision to act despite it. As the weeks went by, she also noticed the way her classmates and teachers treated her changed in subtle, meaningful ways. They listened when she spoke. They acknowledged her contributions. They respected her space and her individuality. It wasn't always easy. She still faced moments of doubt, moments when the old fears crept in, whispering that she didn't belong or wasn't good enough. But each time she faced those fears, each time she played, each time she spoke, she discovered a new layer of strength she hadn't known she possessed. One evening, while practicing alone, she paused and looked at her hands resting on the piano keys. They were the same hands that had once trembled with fear, that had once felt too small to make a sound in the world. Now, they moved with confidence, with purpose, with the power to create beauty. And in that moment, she realized that the music had done more than teach her notes and rhythms. It had taught her resilience, self-belief, and the quiet courage to step into the world as her true self. She understood something important: the moments that scared her the most, the moments when she felt most exposed and vulnerable, were the ones that had the potential to change her life. Each time she faced those moments, she discovered a strength she hadn't known existed. Each time she let her music speak, she opened a door to connection. The girl's confidence grew slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Each day, she walked through the school halls with a little more awareness of her own presence. She still didn't raise her voice, didn't seek attention, but she had begun to notice the way people listened when she spoke, the way they paused to consider her words, the way they watched her play and waited to hear what she would do next. It was a new experience, and it was both thrilling and terrifying. The music class had become a place where she could be herself without fear, and the teacher, while still strict and commanding, began to show subtle signs of respect. She stopped pushing her unnecessarily, allowed her moments to shine, and occasionally offered advice that was meant to guide rather than criticize. For the girl, these small gestures meant more than any overt praise could. They were proof that her hard work and quiet determination were being noticed, that her music had changed the way others saw her. One day, during an afternoon rehearsal, the teacher announced that a new challenge was coming. There would be a special performance for the entire school, an event where students from different grades could showcase their talents. The girl felt her heart sink. Performing for an audience larger than her music class was terrifying. The thought of standing in front of so many people made her palms sweat and her stomach twist. She wanted to say no, to hide in the safety of her usual routine. But the teacher's eyes met hers with a silent command: "You can do this." She took a deep breath and nodded. She had faced fear before, and though it was uncomfortable, she knew she could face it again. This time, the stakes were higher and the audience larger. But the music had taught her that courage was built through action, not avoidance. She spent the next few days preparing, practicing her piece meticulously, refining every note, every pause, every nuance. Her classmates noticed her focus. A few of them approached her, curious about her process. "How do you play like that?" one asked. "It's like the piano is speaking for you." She smiled quietly, shrugging. "I just listen," she said softly. "I let the music tell me what to do." They didn't fully understand, but they respected it. The girl had earned a reputation not through loudness or arrogance, but through consistency, dedication, and undeniable talent. Her quiet demeanor no longer made her invisible. It made her intriguing, mysterious, someone whose abilities demanded attention without needing to shout. The day of the school-wide performance arrived. The gymnasium was transformed with chairs, a stage, and bright lights. Students, teachers, and parents filled the seats, chatting and laughing, unaware of the quiet storm of nerves and excitement brewing backstage. The girl waited in the wings, her hands resting lightly on the piano keys she had brought with her, trying to calm her racing heart. She thought about all the moments that had brought her here the first time. She had been commanded to play in class, the hesitant duet with her classmate, the solo performance in the school competition. Each memory reminded her of the fear she had faced and the courage she had found. She realized that the music wasn't just something she did. It was a part of who she was. It was the bridge between her inner world and the world outside, a way to connect without needing words. When her turn was called, she walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of all eyes on her. The audience seemed enormous, and for a moment, she felt the familiar urge to shrink, to hide, to let someone else take her place. But she remembered the quiet strength she had discovered over the past weeks, the feeling that had carried her through her first public performances. She sat down at the piano, adjusted her posture, and let her fingers hover above the keys. The first note trembled slightly, as if testing the waters, but soon it found its confidence. She played the opening melody with careful precision, feeling the familiar flow of music moving through her. The room grew quiet, the chatter fading as the audience became absorbed in the sound. Her nerves settled, replaced by a calm focus that allowed her to express every emotion she had bottled up for years. She played not to impress, not to prove, but to share a part of herself. The melody rose and fell, gentle yet powerful, conveying joy, sadness, fear, and hope all at once. Each note carried a piece of her story, the quiet moments of doubt, the long hours of practice, the small victories, the courage that had grown with each challenge. As the piece progressed, the audience leaned in, captivated. Teachers exchanged glances of surprise and admiration. Students who had whispered doubts earlier were now watching in awe, unable to look away. The music wasn't just technical brilliance. It was alive, expressive, full of feeling that transcended words. Her fingers moved across the keys with a grace and control that she hadn't realized she possessed. The practice, the dedication, the fear, and the courage all converged in that performance. Every pause was deliberate, every crescendo meaningful. She had learned to let the music breathe, to give it life, to make it speak the way her own voice sometimes could not. When the final note lingered and faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then, slowly, the applause began, swelling until it filled the entire gymnasium. The sound was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. People were on their feet, cheering, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. Moved by the honesty and beauty of the performance, the girl's heart pounded, not with fear, but with exhilaration. She had done it. She had faced the largest audience she had ever encountered and had shared herself fully. And in doing so, she had transformed the way everyone saw her, not as a quiet, timid student, but as someone with talent, courage, and an unmistakable presence. After the performance, people approached her from all directions. Teachers offered congratulations. Students wanted to know how she had learned to play with such emotion, and even parents came forward, expressing admiration and curiosity. She answered softly, modestly, but inside, she felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. Her music had spoken, and people had listened. The teacher approached her as well. The familiar stern expression softened with something almost like pride. "You were extraordinary," the teacher said quietly. "I have watched many students perform, but few have moved me the way you did. Keep playing. Don't ever stop." Those words were heavier than any applause. They weren't just recognition of skill, they were acknowledgement of courage, of growth, of perseverance. The girl realized that she had not only proven her talent, but had also discovered a strength within herself that could carry her through challenges far beyond music. That evening, back at home, she returned to her piano, exhausted but elated. She didn't play the piece from the performance this time. Instead, she let her fingers wander freely, improvising melodies that reflected the whirlwind of emotions from the day. Joy, fear, relief, pride, and anticipation all flowed through her hands. She understood, more than ever, that the music was not just about skill. It was about honesty, about connection, about revealing a piece of oneself to the world. The days that followed were filled with subtle but meaningful changes. Her classmates treated her differently, not with awe or envy, but with respect and curiosity. They asked for her help with music, sought her opinion on projects, and included her in conversations she had once observed from the edges. The girl realized that her quiet presence could now command attention not through words or force, but through authenticity and talent. She also noticed changes within herself. She spoke more confidently, not loudly, but with a clarity and assurance she had never experienced before. She no longer felt invisible or inadequate. She understood that her value was not determined by how others had seen her in the past, but by the courage, dedication, and authenticity she brought to every moment. Her piano became both a sanctuary and a tool for growth. She experimented with compositions, creating new pieces that were bold and expressive, reflecting her evolving understanding of herself and the world. Each note she played was a step forward, a small assertion of identity, a statement that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The girl's journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, with the humiliation of being commanded to play in front of her classmates. But that moment, which had once seemed so frightening, had become a turning point. It had forced her to confront her insecurities, to trust her talent, and to share herself with others. And in doing so, it had opened a door to a world where she could belong, where her voice, both in music and in life, could be heard and valued. She reflected on how much she had grown, not in just days or weeks, but in the way she approached life. Fear was no longer a barrier. It was a signal, a reminder that growth often lay on the other side of discomfort. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And she had discovered that the music, which had been her secret refuge for so long, was also a bridge to connection, understanding, and respect. The school's upcoming events now seemed less intimidating. She felt a quiet determination to continue performing, to continue practicing, to continue exploring the boundaries of her talent and her confidence. The girl who had once been afraid of being seen had become someone who could step into the spotlight, not seeking validation, but expressing herself fully and honestly. Even small moments became meaningful. A classmate complimenting her on a melody, a teacher pausing to acknowledge her effort, or a quiet nod. Life after the school-wide performance felt different for the girl, but not because anyone treated her like a celebrity. No, it was quieter than that. The difference was in how she felt about herself, in the subtle confidence that had begun to grow, almost imperceptibly, like a small plant pushing through the cracks of a sidewalk. People noticed, of course, in the way they asked for her advice, in the way they listened when she spoke, in the glances of quiet respect from teachers who had once overlooked her. But the change was mostly inside her, a quiet transformation that no one could see unless they paid attention. She continued to spend hours at the piano, but now her practice had a purpose beyond simply mastering notes. She experimented with compositions, improvising melodies that reflected her emotions, her fears, her hopes, and her growing sense of self. Each time she played, it was like discovering a new part of herself. She realized that music was not just about skill, it was about honesty, about expression, about connecting with something deeper inside. It had become a way to understand who she was and who she wanted to become. One day, the teacher approached her after class with an unusual request. "There's going to be a small school assembly," the teacher said, her tone more gentle than usual. "I want you to perform. Not for a grade, not as a punishment, but to inspire others. Will you do it?" The girl felt a rush of fear. Standing in front of the entire school, not just her music class, was daunting. The thought of making a mistake, of being judged, of feeling exposed, made her stomach twist. But beneath the fear, there was a spark of courage, the same spark that had carried her through her first public performances. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it," she whispered. In the days leading up to the assembly, she practiced tirelessly. She tried different pieces, experimenting with tempo, rhythm, and emotion. She thought about the audience she would face and imagined how they might react, which was both motivating and nerve-wracking. Her music became a reflection of her journey, the quiet moments of fear, the victories, the perseverance, and the small but steady growth she had experienced. Meanwhile, her classmates continued to watch her with curiosity and respect. Some approached her for advice on how to play better, some for encouragement to face their own fears, and a few simply to listen to her play and learn from the way she expressed herself. She realized that her music had an impact, that it could inspire others, and that her presence mattered more than she had ever imagined. The day of the assembly arrived. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and even some parents. The stage seemed enormous, and the bright lights made her stomach churn with nerves. She sat backstage, her hands hovering over the piano keys, trying to calm herself. The familiar fear was there, but so was a sense of determination. She remembered all the times she had faced similar moments, how each time she had emerged stronger, more confident. When her turn was called, she walked onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly. The audience seemed enormous, and for a moment, she felt the urge to shrink, to disappear. But she reminded herself that she had faced fear before, that she had discovered a strength within herself that no one could take away. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath, letting her fingers hover over the keys. The first note rang out, soft and tentative, and then the music began to flow. She played with a depth of emotion that surprised even her. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying a story of fear, courage, and hope. She poured everything she had into the music, the doubts, the long hours of practice, the triumphs, the quiet determination, and the audience was captivated. As she played, she noticed the way people leaned forward, listening intently. She saw teachers with soft smiles, students with eyes wide in admiration, and parents with expressions of surprise and awe. The music was no longer just notes. It was a conversation, a connection, a bridge between her and everyone in the room. She realized that for the first time, she was not just performing for herself, but for others, sharing something meaningful that could touch their hearts. The piece grew stronger, more expressive, as she let go of fear and allowed the music to guide her. Her fingers moved with precision, but more importantly, with feeling. Every pause was deliberate, every crescendo purposeful, every note a reflection of the journey that had brought her here. She had discovered that true strength was not in perfection, but in honesty, in courage, in the willingness to show herself fully. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence, a heartbeat where the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and louder until it filled the entire auditorium. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Moved by the honesty and beauty of the performance, the girl's heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhilaration. She had faced one of the largest audiences she had ever encountered and had shared herself fully. And in doing so, she realized that her music had the power to inspire, to move, to connect, and to transform. She felt a sense of pride, not in being praised, but in knowing that she had been brave enough to be herself. After the assembly, students and teachers approached her, offering congratulations, asking questions, and expressing admiration. She answered softly, humbly, but inside, she felt a surge of joy and fulfillment. Her music had spoken, and people had listened. Her quiet presence, once overlooked and dismissed, had become a source of inspiration and respect. The teacher, who had once commanded her to play in a way meant to embarrass her, now stood nearby, watching with a rare expression of pride. "You've done something remarkable," the teacher said quietly, "not just because of your talent, but because of your courage. Keep going. Don't ever stop." Those words struck her deeply. They were more than recognition of skill, they were acknowledgement of growth, resilience, and determination. The girl realized that her journey was not just about music. It was about learning to face fear, to trust herself, and to share her gifts with the world. In the weeks that followed, she continued to practice and perform, exploring new compositions and pushing herself further. Her classmates and teachers treated her with respect, seeking her advice, listening to her opinions, and valuing her contributions. She discovered that confidence was not about being loud or outgoing. It was about being authentic, consistent, and willing to face challenges. Her music became a way to navigate life, to express herself, and to connect with others. She experimented with new melodies, blending emotion and technique, and discovered the joy of creating something entirely her own. Each performance, no matter how small, reinforced her sense of self, her courage, and her growing understanding of the world. She also noticed the subtle ways she was changing as a person. She spoke more confidently, asked questions, and shared her ideas with classmates and teachers alike. She realized that courage and skill were not enough on their own. They had to be paired with authenticity, consistency, and the willingness to take risks. The girl who had once been terrified of being seen was learning to step into the light, not to seek approval, but to express herself fully and honestly. The piano remained her sanctuary, a place where she could process emotions, reflect on her experiences, and explore new possibilities. Each day of practice strengthened not just her talent, but her sense of self and her understanding of the world around her. She had learned that growth often came from facing fear, and that the moments that once seemed unbearable could become the ones that defined her. She also discovered the power of inspiration. Her performances began to influence others. Classmates who had once been shy or uncertain began to explore their own talents, encouraged by her example. Teachers noticed the change in the classroom dynamic as students became more willing to take risks, try new things, and support each other. The girl realized that courage could be contagious, that her willingness to face fear and share herself could create ripples, far beyond her own experience. One afternoon, while practicing alone, she paused and reflected on how far she had come. The girl who had once sat quietly in the back of the classroom, afraid to be noticed, had transformed into someone capable of facing challenges, inspiring others, and expressing herself fully. She understood that her journey was ongoing, that fear would continue to appear, and that challenges would continue to rise. But she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that would carry her through. The music had become more than a skill or a talent. It had become a language, a way to connect with others, and a reflection of her own growth. Each note, each melody, each performance was a step forward, a testament to courage, perseverance, and authenticity. She understood that her voice mattered, that her presence could influence others, and that the small, consistent acts of bravery and honesty could create meaningful change. Her parents noticed the change too. They had always supported her, but now they saw the quiet confidence, the determination, and the self-assurance that had grown in her. They encouraged her to continue exploring her talent, to take opportunities, and to trust herself. Their support, combined with the recognition from teachers and peers, reinforced her understanding that she could navigate the world with courage, authenticity, and resilience. And so, the girl continued. She practiced, she performed, she explored, and,